A US airstrike has eliminated scores of jihadist fighters suspected of planning a major attack in Somalia. The Pentagon says the strike has weakened the ability of the Islamist group Al-Shabaab, which for years has waged an insurgency against the government in Mogadishu. Meanwhile, suspected Islamic State fighters have been killed in an attack on Tunisian armed forces. Anne Barker reports.
For weeks, US forces have been monitoring a training camp used by al-Shabaab jihadists north of Mogadishu, the Somali capital. Growing intelligence suggested the group, which is aligned with al-Qaeda, was planning a large-scale attack on possibly US or African forces in the country. Al-Shabaab fighters have claimed responsibility for several recent attacks, including a bomb last month which ripped a hole in a passenger plane. As many as 200 al-Shabaab militants were using the camp. A US official says at least 150 were killed. White House spokesman Josh Earnest.
The fighters who were scheduled to depart the camp pose an imminent threat to US and African Union mission forces in Somalia. Their removal, the removal of those terrorist fighters, degrades al-Shabaab's ability to meet the group's objectives in Somalia, including recruiting new members, establishing bases, and planning attacks on US and AMISOM forces.
Both warplanes and unmanned drones were used in the strike, and the White House says while all efforts were made to avoid civilian casualties, it's yet to confirm those killed were only fighters.
I can tell you that the Department of Defense applies the highest possible standard in avoiding civilian casualties before even deciding to move forward on an operation like this. So avoiding civilian casualties is a very, very high priority. Both for moral reasons, but also because extremist organizations like al-Shabaab would just use the death of innocent civilians to try to recruit additional members and whip up additional anti-US sentiment.
For years, al-Shabaab has waged an insurgency against the government in Mogadishu in a bid to impose Sharia law. Slowly, Somali forces have managed to get the upper hand with training from the US and African Union. The militant group has slowly been wiped out from much of the country, but it's still a major threat in the centre and south. A Somali army spokesman, Moyedin Sayed, says the southern Jubaland state is one of the jihadist group's last strongholds.
We cannot allow al-Shabaab to continue using this region as a hideout. They have been flushed out of most other parts of Somalia. We shall do the same here too.
Al-Shabaab has also lost dozens of members to Islamic State, which in the past year has actively encouraged its recruits to defect and join ISIS. It's a phenomenon happening across northern Africa, where more and more jihadists have pledged allegiance to Islamic State, particularly in Libya, where ISIS has an estimated 5,000 recruits and has taken control of key cities and towns. Overnight, suspected ISIS militants launched an attack on Tunisian army and police bases just over the border. Tunisian soldiers killed more than 30 militants. This is an unprecedented attack, planned and organised, said Tunisia's President Beji Caid Essebsi, and whose goal was probably to take control of this area and announce a new caliphate. Tunisia has struggled with radical Islamism since the 2011 uprising, which ousted the long-standing dictator Zine El Abidine Ben Ali. Militants trained in Libyan camps carried out 2 attacks in Tunisia last year, including the mass shooting that killed 23 people at the Bardo Museum. Tunisia is now the largest source of recruits leaving the country to join ISIS in Syria or Iraq. But President Essebsi says Tunisians can be confident their armed forces will defeat the Islamist threat. The majority of Tunisians are united, he says. They're at war against this barbarism, against these rats that we'll eradicate with God's will.
Tunisian President Beji Caid Essebsi ending that report by Anne